A chemist painted this. His name was Felix Yelwachinski. He treated art like a problem that refused to stay solved. Paint gave way to print, copper to oilcloth to cardboard. When he needed a printing press, he used a clothes wringer. His paintings and prints can look as if 3 different artists made them. He never became one kind of artist. That may be the reason almost no one remembers him. Felix grew up around materials. His father, Mikau, was a sculptor who ran a factory making plaster decoration for buildings. Felix learned to draw there and modelled figures in clay, but he did not enter an art academy at that point. The Warsaw school system had left him disgusted by restrictions on speaking and reading Polish. He went to Dorpat, where he sat his final examination in German and then studied chemistry and biology. He spent long hours studying cells and tissues through a microscope. A 1938 account credits him with developing a mixture that stained cell nuclei black, then selling it to the German biological stain company Grubler & Co. Science did not sit apart from his art. It gave him a habit he would never lose. Examine the material until it produced something new. After his parents died, he briefly helped his brothers run the family workshop. At home, he and one brother played difficult piano music together. One always took the right-hand part and the other took the left. His friendship with the painter Yusuf Pankajewicz drew him further into Warsaw's artistic world. In 1891, Felix's painting Sleeping Beauty was hailed as the first work of Polish symbolism. The painting itself is sadly now lost. 2 years later, he travelled through Italy with Pankajewicz. That same year, he painted Mephisto, one red-gloved hand pressed to his face beneath enormous green wings. He would not remain only a painter. In 1907, Felix began making bookplates, small ownership labels pasted inside books. They were precise and conventional enough to hide what was coming. Painting had given him colour and atmosphere. Printmaking gave him materials he could attack. One of his inventions had already helped him reach Paris, a new kind of pastel made with petroleum jelly. After selling the patent, he spent several years there studying graphic techniques. Traditional etching began with a metal plate. Felix replaced the metal with oilcloth. He cut the image into its soft surface with a needle, rubbed ink into the lines, then worked across it with cloths in his bare hands. The softer material gave him blurred edges that copper could not. He called the process ceratorit. Then came prepared cardboard, followed by cardboard covered in sand. Each surface gave him a different texture. The difficulty came when he needed to print them. Felix did not own an etching press, so he used a clothes wringer. He inked the surface, laid paper over it, and fed both through the rollers. By changing the ink, wiping sections by hand, and retouching the finished impressions, he could make 2 prints from the same plate look almost unrelated. For Felix, printing was not a way to make copies. It was a way to begin the image again. In 1911, a print made using ceratorit entered a major Polish print competition. The process had been kept secret, and the result looked so much like conventional etching that the judges took it for one. It won 4th prize. The chemist with the clothes wringer had fooled the professionals. That homemade process could do more than produce small experimental prints. It gave Felix a way to rebuild entire cities. The names on them were Warsaw or Venice. Accuracy was another matter. Felix could draw a city with severe precision. The streets are measured and the buildings hold their weight. So when the architecture begins to dissolve, it is deliberate. When a friend objected that one Warsaw view was inaccurate, Felix said he did not care how the city really looked. He was showing Warsaw as it ought to be. He had travelled through Italy twice. Working from memory, he allowed buildings to grow beyond their real proportions. At first, light describes the city. Then it begins to break it apart. A tower under the moon becomes almost weightless. A church front spreads across the page in arches far larger than the people beneath it. In the darkest prints, the city is reduced to a few lamps and whatever they can rescue from the black. Walls lose their edges. Streets lead towards buildings that barely seem solid. The darker prints feel closer to states of mind than architectural records. Inside the great churches, stone columns rise through scaffolding. Colour survives in fragments, while the rest is swallowed by lines and shadow. These changes were deliberate. Felix knew exactly what he was removing. He returned permanently to Warsaw in 1913 and later produced 2 portfolios devoted to the city, published in 1916 and 1918. Some views give a building every window, cornice and brick. Others remember the city through darkness, rather than map it from the street. His cities barely move. While his cities barely move, by the early 1920s, he was printing dancers that could not keep still. By the early 1920s, Felix prints had filled with people. They kick, lean and fold into one another. A couple begins a dance and ends up looking trapped inside it. These are not careful records of choreography. They are performances, pushing until the pose gives way. One woman lifts her skirt with complete confidence while her legs seem to belong to 2 different dances. Another dancer disappears into a knot of arms and skirts, still trying to hold the pose. The bodies are exaggerated, but the behaviour remains recognisable. Everyone wants to appear graceful. Almost no one succeeds. Felix had spent years writing criticism and working for illustrated magazines, including the satirical journal Machteld. That eye for human absurdity is all over these prints. The dancers are vain and determined. They are also having a marvellous time. A woman perches on her partner as though he were furniture. Another couple twists into a shape no dance teacher could have planned. The figures look bent like broken puppets, yet they remain brilliantly alive. The joke works because the dancers seem convinced of their own elegance. Felix lets the viewer see the strain underneath it. A smile becomes a mask. A fashionable pose stretches way too far. The dance continues because stopping would be more embarrassing. These prints appear to belong to a different artist from the man who made the silent cities. The line is heavier and the colour louder. The people refuse to remain still long enough for darkness to swallow them. But the same instinct is at work. He takes something familiar, changes the rules, then keeps going until it becomes strange. His dancers crowd the page. In Warsaw's cafes, Felix usually kept to himself. Felix was a familiar figure in the city's cafes. He smoked heavily, drank black coffee, and wore the same coat throughout much of the year. While conversation moved around him, he wrote fiction, covered pages with calculations, or returned to another invention. People called him an eccentric. The label was too convenient. It was also much smaller than the man. Novels, exhibition reviews, concert criticisms, and magazine illustrations all came from the same restless mind. One account describes him working through hunger and cold, cutting and gluing materials, ruining a plate, then beginning again. Sometimes weeks of labour produced just one usable impression, but that was enough to delight him. He was not ignored during his lifetime. Felix exhibited regularly, belonged to the Polish Artists Association Sztuczka, and showed work at the Venice Biennial in 1914. His problem was never recognition, it was that no single label fitted him. Later, he moved into the former studio as Władysław Podkowinski. Podkowinski had scandalised Warsaw with one explosive painting. Felix changed so often that none of his works could represent the rest. While he was alive, that range was his strength. Afterwards, it made him difficult to categorise. A symbolist painter should be placed beside other symbolists. A city printmaker could be remembered for his cities. Felix was also a chemist, a novelist, and an inventor whose funniest images looked nothing like his most solemn ones. A long illness eventually confined him to bed. He spent his final period at Warsaw's Hotel Victoria and died there in March 1928. The surviving accounts do not name the illness. The devil, the disappearing streets, and the dancers bent almost beyond recognition came from the same habit of mind. He found the material, pushed against its limits, then moved on when the answer became too comfortable. The variety was not an interruption in his career. It was the career. Art history prefers an artist it can recognise at a glance. Felix Yapłaczyński never offered it one. Felix once worked in the former studio as Władysław Podkowinski, a painter who put Warsaw into shock with a single canvas, then returned to the exhibition and created a scandal. Click on screen to see his story next. Thanks for watching.